Hi there, and welcome to this webinar. We're here to explore how to use Honeycode apps to power your business processes and to integrate those apps with your existing workflows using Zapier or Amazon AppFlow with no code. To introduce ourselves, I am Rajesh. I lead the product integrations for Honeycode.
And I'm AJ, a senior product specialist here at Honeycode.
Here's a quick glance at the agenda. We'll start with an introduction to Honeycode and a quick demo to showcase what Honeycode is capable of. We'll talk about the customer problems that customers asked us to solve with integrations. We'll do a couple of demos to show how those integrations can be achieved. And we'll end with some closing thoughts. Let's start with a brief overview of Honeycode for our audience members who may be new to it. So AJ, can you walk us through the problem you're trying to solve for our customers with Honeycode?
Yeah, thanks, Rajesh. We hear from our customers that every business process is unique within their teams, departments, and companies. These could be for things like expense tracking, managing marketing campaigns, or even just project and task tracking. All these processes do have some threads in common. They track data over time, they have reminders and notifications, they manage workflows that involve several team members and stakeholders that need approvals, and more. Our customers have also told us that they manage these sorts of processes using spreadsheets, emails, calendar reminders, or a combination of all of those. For small teams, this might work, but if your team gets to be bigger than a handful of people, this results in a lot of email back and forth, or spreadsheets with multiple versions, where one person usually having to reconcile all of those changes. This leads to a lot of frustration and potentially missed deadlines. This is why we built Amazon Honeycode. It enables our customers to build custom applications that suit their unique needs without needing to wait for IT or learning to write code.
Thanks for that introduction to the problems, AJ. To make it concrete on how to solve some of these problems, how about we walk through a quick demo of what Honeycode is capable of? This is the Honeycode home drive. It shows all of your workbooks and apps. Workbooks are like containers for your tables, automations, and apps. We'll talk a bit about all of them in a minute here. What you can also see here are some links, which are especially helpful if you're new to Honeycode, although I recommend exploring them even if you're not. The way to get started with Honeycode is by creating a new workbook. We provide some excellent templates that can help you get started. You can use them as is or customize them to meet your specific requirements. For the purpose of this demo, though, I'm going to use the workbook AJ and I put together as a demo use case. I'm going to navigate to the new product to-do workbook. This is based on the simple to-do template. Now, AJ and I, we're both passionate product people and are always thinking about new product ideas. In this instance, we thought to ourselves, gee, can we use Honeycode to pull together a list of tasks for ourselves to launch a new product? So this is the table of tasks AJ and I came up with. Basically, we wanted to find and interview customers and work backwards from their needs to come up with a new product.
So Rajesh, this looks very similar to a spreadsheet, but what might look new to customers are those drop-downs and those blue-colored links.
Indeed, AJ. Yeah, it does look like a spreadsheet, doesn't it? But it works like a database. For example, the drop-downs that you called out, AJ, for status rows, it links to a row in the status table. And the status table, in turn, links back to many rows in the tasks table. In this case, there are 5 tasks which are not done. So you can use these features to link together various tables the way you would relate those entities in the real world. There are more cool things you can do with tables, including using spreadsheet expressions, looking up values easily, summarizing tables, and more. But I want to talk about apps. Honeycode lets you build mobile and web apps. The cool thing about these apps is that you can make changes to the data or to your app here, and it's shared with your team instantaneously. There's no waiting, no building, no deployment, so no one's out of the loop. This app, when I open it, has a list of tasks that each of us has to do to get our work done, and we can check them off as we go through it. This, by the way, is the web app view. There's also a mobile view, as I called out earlier. In this screen, I'm only seeing my tasks. I can click on each of these tasks and get into more details. I can also navigate to the all tasks screen that shows all of my tasks, all of our tasks, including AJ's tasks. And all of this is customizable and built just for our need. For instance, if I wanted to change this screen so it only showed me my tasks, I could easily accomplish this by going back to the builder, selecting the all tasks screen, selecting the list, which shows all the tasks, and then applying personalization. I can select the column that contains the person, assignee in this case, and that's all there is to it. If I navigate back to the app, it now shows me only my tasks. And if AJ were to log in, he would only see his tasks. This app is live both on mobile and web, so our team can track these tasks from anywhere. Of course, this app already has a My Tasks page, and we can't really hide tasks between each other, although I'd like for AJ to believe that I'm doing more than I actually am. So I'm going to go back here and back out the personalization change. Switching gears here a little bit, in the table that we saw earlier, there is a due date column, but it's not terribly useful if people don't know that there is a deadline approaching. One of the benefits of using Honeycode is that you can set up automations to notify the team when there is an update or remind people when it's their turn to take an action. Let me show you exactly how to do that using a Honeycode automation. So this area lists all table automations. That is, automations that are triggered when there are changes to tables. I'm going to select the reminder automation. This is the automation builder that helps you turn your workflows and business processes into well-oiled machines. Automations have a trigger, which causes the automation to be activated, followed by one or more actions. In this case, the automation is set up to be triggered when the date in the notification column is reached. But they can also be triggered on other conditions, such as row added or deleted, when column is changed, when cell is changed. The action in this case is to send an email to the person in the assignee column. And also notice how the body of the email can include data from the tables to make it contextual for my use case. In this case, it is getting data from the task column. Now, if I made a change to this automation, all I would have to do is to hit publish to activate them.
So this is great, Rajesh. But I believe customers might also be curious if they can use automations in apps instead of just tables.
Absolutely, they can, AJ. For example, if I navigate back to the app builder, select the to-do app, and select add task screen, there's a button here to add. When it's clicked, it presumably writes a new row to the table we saw earlier. Let's see how it does that by clicking the Actions tab and Edit Automations button. Now, if you notice, this automation always starts when the button is clicked. This way, it's different from table automations, which are triggered on data changes and time reached. And as we suspected, this adds a new row to the tasks table.
So that's pretty cool. But I'm always on Slack. I'd love to be updated when new tasks are added to our product to-do list. Can you walk us through how we made that possible?
Absolutely, AJ. This is exactly the kinds of use cases our customers asked us for as well. And I'd like to take a step back here for a second to share the story. So when we launched Honeycode, the response was overwhelming. It showed us that there was clearly a pent-up demand for democratizing app development for the underserved needs of the everyday heroes. However, our users were clear in telling us that they wanted their Honeycode apps to work well with hundreds of apps and services they already use. To give you a sense of scale, integrations made up 37% of all feature requests we heard since launch. Customers told us that they wanted us to enable two kinds of integrations, more so than others. The first kind is to allow Honeycode to react to events happening in other SaaS apps, and vice versa. For example, AJ, like you said, customers would love for Slack to be notified when a new team task is added in Honeycode, or for Honeycode to know when there's an issue added in Jira, for instance. The second kind was to allow Honeycode to use data generated by other apps. For instance, to allow Honeycode apps to be built on data generated on Salesforce, Marketo, or Zendesk, or others. To enable this, we partnered with Zapier and Amazon AppFlow. So you can do all of your integrations, no coding necessary. Developers can still build their own custom integrations because we make all the APIs that power Zapier and AppFlow experience via the AWS SDK, but it's not necessary to use them. AJ, back to your question. You want to show how to send the new task announcement to Slack?
Yes, definitely. So Rajesh, in the two kinds of integrations you spoke of, this falls into the first category, which is having Honeycode as the source and having Slack react to Honeycode events. I'll do this by using Zapier. Zapier is an online automation tool that connects your favorite apps, such as Honeycode, with other apps such as Slack, Jira, and more. You can connect 2 or more apps to automate repetitive tasks without coding or relying on developers to build that integration. It's easy enough that anyone can build their own app workflows with just a few clicks, and that's what I'll show here. So here's a look at our specific process flow. You'll notice there are 3 steps involved. First, I'll create a webhook URL in Zapier. Think of this as a phone number to call into, so to speak. Then I'll create a Honeycode automation to send our task to that webhook URL, which would be the caller. This can be done from a Honeycode table or even simply a button within the Honeycode app, such as what Rajesh demonstrated earlier. The third and final step is to update the Zap to send the data from Honeycode to Slack, basically the place to route the call to. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. I'll begin in the Zapier console to create a new Zap. Then, as a trigger, I'll search for the webhooks app event. Note that this is a premium feature, so to accomplish what I'm doing, you'll need to be on that Zapier's paid tier. For trigger event, I'll select catch hook, which will generate that URL for Honeycode to send data to. This is that phone number from the previous analogy. Let's click continue. We'll copy this and we'll head over to Honeycode. Now in Honeycode, I'll use that same product to-do workbook that Rajesh had shown earlier. And just as a reminder, my goal here is to complete that second step of my process flow, which is to create a new Honeycode automation to send any new task that's added to this app over to Zapier. And I'll do this by using Honeycode's table automation. As Rajesh had previously mentioned, automations can be triggered on events such as date or time reached, row added or deleted, row column changes, and more. Since we want to know when a new task is added, I'll select the row added or deleted trigger. Then I'll select the task table. And then finally, I'll choose when a row is added to the task table. Next, we have to instruct Honeycode what actions to take when this trigger occurs. And in this case, our action will be a webhook. Now, in this prompt, I will paste that Zapier webhook that I pulled from the previous Zapier console. Now, the webhook payload is the Honeycode data that are sent to the Zapier webhook. Specifically here, the value will be our task name, and for the payload name will be task_name. All right, now we have an automation. Let's go and add a task in our to-do app. So Rajesh, what tasks do you think we have remaining for this project?
Oh, geez, we have so many. And we certainly both could use a coffee. On a more serious note, though, how about getting an engineer on board so they can provide us with some technical feedback?
Ah, there you go. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go ahead and add that then. And for now, I'll leave the rest as default. Now, notice the new task in my list. However, if you recall, I'm not done here yet, as there are 3 steps total that I need to complete. First is that webhook URL in Zapier. Second is to create a Honeycode automation, which we've done those 2 already. And then the third one is to complete the Zap so that it will send this new task over to the Slack team channel. So let's head back over to Zapier to do just that. So I'll proceed here by testing out the trigger. You'll notice that the Zap has already picked up the request that was sent from Honeycode. So let's proceed. Now, a Zap action is where you define what should happen after a Zap is triggered. And in our case, it's when a new row is added to the Honeycode table. As discussed, we want to pass this new task onto a Slack channel. So I can either search for that here, or I can simply choose Slack. Action event is where it lists out a number of different Slack actions you can take. For now, I'll simply send this to a channel. And for account, I've already pre-configured a Slack account, so I'll select that.
So AJ, it looks like in setting up an action, there's a lot of options to choose from. Are there something specific you're going to choose from?
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, Rajesh, there are many different choices here. From which channel, what text, when to schedule, which threads, and more. But for now, I'll just stick with which channel to send it to, which is my general channel, and then what specific message I would like to send, which is that task name. Now for the message text, rather than just that task name, I'll actually add a statement in here. And I'll scroll down and click continue. Now let's test and review it and see if it's successful. I'll head over to Slack. And sure enough, there is my new task with the appropriate text for the entire team to be aware of. Now, the last step here is I'll turn this Zap on so that from here on out, any new task that is added will be sent over to our Slack channel.
Excellent. So now I see how you can have Slack react to Honeycode events. I think we should talk about how our customers can have Honeycode react to other SaaS events, like say update a row when I get a Slack message, basically the other direction.
Yes, definitely. I'll use Jira as an example for that. Another team of ours could be managing a project related to the new product that you and I are working on. And those could be managed within Jira. That's what the team's comfortable with. As issues arise and are reported in Jira, we'd like to see that sent to our new products to do Honeycode app, the very same one we use for your demo and for the Slack notifications. This would allow our team to centrally manage all of our tasks from within the Honeycode app, as well as be notified of all the tasks coming in from multiple sources. Now notice the order of events is a bit different this time. We'll still begin in Zapier, but instead of creating a webhook URL, we'll use native Jira triggers. Then instead of creating a Honeycode automation, we'll go to Jira and create a new issue. Then, like before, we'll complete it by updating the Zap, but this time we'll have it sent over to Honeycode, specifically to that task table that I showed you earlier. So like before, I'll head over to Zapier and create a Zap. The app event this time will be Jira Software Cloud. So I'll start typing that in. For a trigger event, as mentioned, we'll go with a new issue, and I'll click continue. Now I'll go with the predefined Jira account that I've established. And then for project, I'll select the new product project, which is what our team's been working on. Now, to test it, I'll head over to the Jira console and click and create an issue. Let me head back over to the Zap and see if Zapier picked up the new issue. Sure enough, it says we found an issue, and I'll search for it. There it is, review customer feedback. The next step is a reverse from earlier, which is we want to take action on a Honeycode table this time. So I'll do that by going into Amazon Honeycode. You'll notice here there's a robust set of actions I can take on the Honeycode data based on changes in Jira. For example, if a Jira issue was resolved, I could delete the corresponding task in Honeycode. Or if there are changes to existing issues, I could overwrite or update or insert corresponding Honeycode tasks. However, in this case, I'll keep it simple and add a new row or task for every Jira issue that is logged. Like before, I'll select a pre-configured account. And for the workbook, I'll choose the new product to do workbook that we've been working on. And then for the table, I'll select the task table.
So AJ, it looks like all the columns from the table showed up. Do we need to use all of them? Can you elaborate a bit more?
That's right, Rajesh. With this integration, I am able to populate any of the Honeycode columns in my table with either data straight from the Jira issue or completely customized. But for now, I'll populate just the Honeycode task column with that Jira summary field. And since I'm the point on these incoming tasks, I'll add myself as the assignee. The rest of the columns I'll manage from within the Honeycode app. So let's continue on here. Notice that the Zap has already picked up that issue that we created in Jira. Now what I'd like to do is test and review it and see what happens within the Honeycode app. And there it is. Now I can click on this task, assign the due date, set a reminder, or other types of actions. Now, the last call out here is, if you recall, we have Honeycode automation set up to send any new task over to Slack. Let's verify that it showed up there as well. And there it is. A new issue that was reported by a separate team in Jira went to our Honeycode to-do app to be centrally managed, and now it's showing up in our Slack channel so that all members will be aware of it. Now, I'd like to pass it over to you, Rajesh, to talk about the next steps with AppFlow.
That's awesome, AJ. Now customers know how to move data from Honeycode to other SaaS apps or vice versa using Zapier. Of the two scenarios our customers asked for, this is the first one, to enable customers to create Zaps to react to events in Honeycode or other SaaS apps. But customers also asked us to enable Honeycode to use data generated in other apps. For instance, to allow Honeycode apps to be built on data generated on Salesforce, Marketo, Zendesk, or even data stored in Amazon S3 buckets. To enable this second scenario, we partnered with Amazon AppFlow. AppFlow is a fully managed integration service that enables you to securely exchange data between software as a service applications such as Salesforce and AWS services such as Honeycode. For example, you can ingest contact records from Salesforce or pull up support tickets from Zendesk into a Honeycode table. To use AppFlow, you would start in the AWS console and look for AppFlow under services. There's a ton of helpful information here on how it works and how to use the service. I highly recommend it, especially if you're new. But for this demo, I'll jump straight to creating a flow. AppFlow has this concept called flow, which enables customers to configure a source and a destination, and rules to follow to move data between them. So for our task tracker example, if our team were to upload CSV files to an S3 bucket and we wanted to pull that data into Honeycode on a schedule, we'd use a flow. A flow can have a name and an optional description. I'm going to call this tasks sync demo, and I'll leave the description blank. But it's useful to have one in case you want to use AppFlow collaboratively, or even just to remind yourself why you built this flow later. AppFlow encrypts your data for security. Customers also have an option to customize encryption settings, but I'm not going to do that for this demo. I also have an option to add tags to streamline billing. Again, I'll skip that for the sake of this demo. The next step is to configure a source.
So Rajesh, I see many options here. Potentially, all of these could be used as sources to populate data in Honeycode apps, correct?
Absolutely, AJ. So you could bring in data from Google Analytics, Datadog, Amplitude, Salesforce, and build your Honeycode apps on top of it. For the purpose of this demo, I'll select the S3 bucket as that's where we store the CSV file. As you can see in my S3 bucket here, I have a CSV file that I'd like to import into Honeycode. Now, I may not know the name of the file exactly because I plan on writing into the bucket periodically. So I'll select the S3 bucket in question and use a prefix task. So AppFlow knows to pick up all the CSVs with that prefix as required. Now I want this data to come into Honeycode. So I will select Honeycode as the destination. Now I'll need to set up a connection to Honeycode. This will allow AppFlow to append rows to Honeycode table on my behalf. I'll choose to create a new connection here to show you how this thing works. I'll need to give this a name. I'll call this Honeycode auth and click continue. In the next screen, Honeycode asks if I consent to giving AppFlow access to my workbooks. I can also terminate a connection from within Honeycode account anytime I want. So after carefully reading this page, I'm going to click allow. Now that that connection is set up, the next logical step is to select the workbook that will be the destination for the data coming from the CSV file in the S3 bucket. I'm going to select the demo workbook that AJ and I created. Next, I'll need to select a table in this workbook to put the data into. So I'm going to select the tasks screen. Next, I have an option to choose how errors are handled. I can stop the current flow, or I can have it ignore and continue the flow run. For the purpose of this demo, I will leave it as default. As for triggers, I have an option on how to trigger it. I could choose to run it on demand or run it on schedule. While I do want to run this on schedule, I won't be able to show you how that works if I did that. So I'm going to leave it at run on demand.
So Rajesh, I see run on events is disabled here. Does that mean you cannot use AppFlow to synchronize data on events?
That's a good question, AJ. In this instance, I chose S3 bucket as a source, which does not produce events of interest here. Instead, if I had chosen Salesforce, for example, I could use events. For example, trigger this when an object changes. So you could use AppFlow to synchronize based on events as well. Anyway, the next step for me is to map the columns in the CSV, called fields here, to columns in the Honeycode table. So the right data is written to the right place. Fortunately for us, AppFlow automates this process when we have sensible column names, when we use the map all fields directly option. Of course, I can change the assignments if they are incorrect, but in this case, it looks like AppFlow is doing a good job of mapping these. So I'm going to leave them as is. Next, I could optionally set up validations, which validates data before moving, which can be a powerful feature if we expect some data to be not clean. And I could set up filters, which filters out some data. So only relevant data is moved to the destination. Again, a quite powerful feature that enables some advanced use cases. But for this use case, neither of them seem necessary, so I'll move right ahead. At this stage, AppFlow gives me a summary of all the configurations I have made, and I can go back and edit if something does not look right. In this instance, however, everything looks correct to me, so I'll go ahead and create the flow.
All right, so does this mean the flow will begin running right away?
Not quite. What we completed is the configuration of the flow. When it runs will be determined by the trigger criteria we set up. In this case, we wanted the flow to run on demand, so it won't be triggered unless I manually trigger it by clicking on run flow.
Ah, okay, that makes sense then.
So to recap, here's the contents of the CSV file that we want to be populated in this Honeycode table. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click run flow and trigger the flow. Perfect. It looks like that completed. And as you can see, the data from my CSV file is populated in the Honeycode table. And I can now go back and run this on schedule like I wanted to, and have this business process be automated without writing a single line of code.
Great. Now that we've looked at both Zapier and AppFlow, in addition to webhooks, Rajesh, could you share a bit on when customers might want to use one over the other, or when to venture off and use the Honeycode API?
Absolutely. So AJ, this is indeed a question that our customers frequently ask us. I think there's a few considerations to determine which one to use. First, consider whether the application or service that you want to connect to Honeycode is supported by Amazon AppFlow or Zapier. If your app is only supported in one of these services, that may be the natural choice. If both Zapier and Amazon AppFlow support your app, then there are a few other considerations to think through. Zapier moves one row of data at a time. This is great for event synchronization use cases, but may not work as well for larger data sets. AppFlow can move multiple rows of data at a time. Another thing to think about is the direction of data movement. Zapier supports Honeycode both as a source and as a data destination, the data source using webhooks, of course. With AppFlow, Honeycode is only a data destination today. Finally, think about operations you might want to perform. Zapier supports a robust set of operations, as AJ showed earlier. Update or insert, delete, and read are supported in addition to append. Append is also supported by AppFlow. The final thing to think about is that AppFlow supports AWS services such as CloudTrail-based logging and securely moving data within Amazon VPCs so it does not travel over internet. That might be something to consider if those things are important for your use case. Finally, if neither AppFlow nor Zapier support your use case, I would then venture out to using webhooks or APIs directly. The primary consideration there may be whether you want your business process to respond to Honeycode events. If yes, consider using webhooks, as they can send information about the Honeycode event to any webhook endpoint. We find that some of our customers use API Gateway and Lambda to process events from Honeycode in interesting ways using this webhook mechanism. Alternatively, if you care about reading and writing data to Honeycode tables, then you can consider the table CRUD APIs. We have some customers who move data this way. And we also have an example on our forum where one of our solutions architect built an example to pull data from Honeycode and visualize it in QuickSight. It's really cool, and you should check it out if you're interested in it.
So this is all good information. One thing I'll ask though is, are there other considerations customers should keep in mind?
Yes, the final consideration I'll leave you with is performance. If your integration is such that it moves a large amount of data, then run them when you don't expect app users to be active, such as late at night. That way, your app user performance is unaffected by integrations. To summarize what we talked about today, we talked about how Honeycode lets you build, no coding necessary. We also talked about how customers asked us to integrate their existing apps and services with Honeycode. And based on that input, we talked about how Honeycode now lets you create workflows where Honeycode apps can react to events in other apps and vice versa using Zapier. Again, no code required. We also talked about how you can use data collected in other apps as source for your Honeycode apps using AppFlow with no code. Finally, we talked about some things to think about when choosing between these options you have to integrate Honeycode apps with other apps and services. You can start building apps today by signing up for free at honeycode.aws. You can also try out our integration capabilities. You'll need a Zapier account to try the Zapier integration. You can get one for free at zapier.com. You will need an AWS account to try out AppFlow. Thank you for your interest, and we hope you build something awesome.